Hey guys, Mr. Dunstan here with part two of musical instrument families. Now, the reason I'm doing a part two is because last week, after we watched the video of George meeting the orchestra, I realized that they didn't tell you about all the instruments and they didn't name all of the instruments in at least one of the families. So we're going to look at them today. But before we do that, had some questions last week at the end of the video that I want to see if we can answer. So let's take a look at those now. Our first question was, what country does George live in? Is it A, America, B, Germany, C, Australia, or D, Italy? Well, if you said C, Australia, you're right, because remember he said that he visited the Australian Youth Symphony, and they're in Sydney, Australia. All right, the next question. What are the four families of instruments? Are they A, meat, vegetables, fruit, and candy, B, strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion, C, cars, trucks, motorcycles, and carriages, or D, boys, girls, dogs, and cats? Well, if you said B, strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion, you are right. All right, let's go to our third question. Third question, what instrument did George choose at the end of the video? Was it the trumpet, the cello, the xylophone, or he wanted to be the conductor? Well, you guys are smart, so you probably picked D. He wanted to be the conductor. And then there was also a bonus question, and it said, there is actually a fifth family of instruments. Do you know what it is? Well, this one's a little tougher because I didn't give you multiple choice, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what the answer is. It is the keyboard family, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. But right now, let's get to our musical instrument families. There are 5 families of musical instruments: the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, and the keyboard. Now, a lot of music teachers don't consider the keyboard family to be a family, but I do, so we're just going to talk about it that way. First, let's look at the string family. Now, the members of the string family include 2 types of instruments: instruments that are bowed and instruments that are plucked. Let's look at the bowed instruments first, because these are the ones that George met when he met the orchestra. They are the violin and the viola, and you notice right away that they look almost exactly the same, but the viola is a little bit larger than the violin, and the notes it plays are a little bit lower. The next one is the cello, and you notice that she is sitting down to play the cello because it's a lot bigger than the violin or the viola. And then the string bass, which is so large that the player has to stand up or sit on a stool to play it. Now you notice that all 4 of these instruments have the same basic shape. They all look just alike, except they are different sizes. And the player pulls the bow across the strings to make them vibrate. Now here come some instruments that you did not meet in last week's video. The instruments that are plucked. And these instruments are plucked with fingers or a pick. And the first 2 you've seen before, the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar. Now, the electric guitar needs an amplifier to be plugged into, but the acoustic guitar does not, because the word acoustic is a word that basically means it does not need electricity. So you can play an acoustic guitar without plugging it into an amp. Next comes the banjo, and it's played by a very famous guy. His name is Steve Martin. Steve Martin started off as a comedian and then turned into a movie star, but he also plays the banjo very, very well. And finally, we have the harp. And the harp is also played in orchestras, but sometimes by itself. and it's a very elegant instrument. You can tell by the way the lady is dressed. Now, there are lots of other string instruments besides all of these, but these are the main ones. Let's move on to the woodwind family. Woodwind instruments get their name from a small piece of wood called a reed that the player blows air across so that it vibrates. Here's a little thing though, they're not all made out of wood. Let's look at them. First we have the flute, which you can see it's not made of wood, it's made by metal, but it does not have a reed attached to it. You just blow air across the mouthpiece. Then there's the oboe and the clarinet, which look very similar, but they have different kinds of reeds. Then there's the bassoon, which is a large instrument that you hold and sit down to play. Now, you met all of these in the orchestra with George last week, but one instrument you did not meet with George last week was the saxophone. There are different types of saxophones, but that's the main one right there. Okay? Now, here's the one where we had a little bit of a problem in the video with George. The brass family. Brass instruments are made from a type of metal called brass. And I noticed in the video last week that they did not name the brass instruments. So let's look at them now. First, we have the trumpet. The trumpet is a brass instrument that you hold and you blow air through it. The French horn, you notice that the bell points backwards because of the way you have to hold it and the way it's laid out. The trombone has a slide that goes in and out, and that's how you change the notes. And the tuba is the largest of the brass instruments. That's the one that Mr. Dunstan used to play a long time ago. And it plays the lowest notes in the music family. So those are the brass instruments that they did not name last week in the video. I was very surprised to see that. All right, let's move on now to the percussion family. The percussion family is the largest instrument family. And there are three types of percussion instruments. There are instruments that you strike, such as the snare drum, the cymbal, the congas, and the timpani. And then there are instruments that you shake, like maracas, tambourines, a shaker, and an African shaker. And then there are percussion instruments that you scrape, like the cabasa, the washboard, and the wiro. Let's take a look at those right quick. First, instruments that you strike. These instruments are struck with sticks, mallets, brushes, or even just your hands. First, you have a snare drum, which the player plays with a pair of sticks. Then there's the timpani, and he plays those with mallets, which are very much like sticks, except they have some padding on the end. Then there's a cymbal, which is being played by a brush, but you can also play it with mallets or sticks. And then there's the conga, and you can see that the conga is played with the player's hands. Now, these are not the only kinds of instruments that you strike. There are a lot of others, but these are the main ones. All right, let's go to the next one. Instruments that you shake, and a lot of these we've used in our classroom. The tambourine, maracas, the shaker, and the African shaker. Now, one type of shaken instrument that's not on this list is the fruit shaker. We use a lot of those in our music class, especially banana. Next comes percussion instruments that you scrape. This is the cabasa. The part with the beads is laid in the player's palm of his hand, and then you hold the handle with your other hand and you turn it so that they scrape on some metal. Next comes one called the wiro, and you hold it with the two fingers in the holes that you see there. The other hand holds the scraper and you scrape it. And then there's a washboard. Now, the reason it's called a washboard is because people used to actually use these to wash clothes before we had washing machines. But nowadays they're mostly used as instruments, and the player just scrapes the ridges with his fingers, but he doesn't just use his fingers. Sometimes he'll put little metal things on the tips of his fingers, or he might use a spoon to get a certain sound. And this is used a lot in the music that comes out of New Orleans. Okay, so those are our 4 families that George met when he met the orchestra. But then, like I said earlier, there's a 5th family called the keyboard family. And the keyboard family has a lot of different instruments too, but we're going to look at the 4 main ones. Now, keyboard instruments are all played by pressing keys, but they produce sounds in a lot of different ways. So let's talk about that. First is the harpsichord. Now, this is an instrument that people played before the piano showed up. And the reason it sounds different from the piano is because when you push a key, the strings inside are plucked, just like some of the other string instruments. Then, of course, we have the piano. And a lot of people think that the piano is a very old instrument because you see them everywhere. But pianos are actually pretty young instruments. And the strings on a piano are struck by hammers. So a lot of people think that maybe the piano should belong to the percussion family, just like they think the harpsichord should belong to the string family. But then again, the piano has strings inside it too. What a problem. Let's move on. The next instrument is the organ. When you push a key on an organ, air is forced through pipes to make the sound. That's very different from the piano and the harpsichord. And then finally, we have a synthesizer. The sound is produced electronically. When you push a key, you get the sound of whatever instrument you set it to. Now, all of these instruments are played the same way. You press keys and they all have identical keyboards, but the sound is produced a lot of different ways. On a harpsichord, the strings are plucked. On a piano, they're struck with hammers. Now, the organ doesn't have any strings, but it has pipes, and when you push a key, the air is pushed through the pipes. And a synthesizer, you push the key, and it generates a tone electronically. Now, this is not what all of these instruments look like. There are lots of different types, and there's other keyboard instruments as well. But those are the 5 families of instruments. So there you have it, part 2 of our musical instruments. Now, I don't have any questions this week because I cleared up some questions from last week, but I hope this helped you out. So I will see you next week, and we'll learn something else about music. So stay safe, wash your hands, and obey your parents. See you later, guys.